This is the image of him, the Doctor. He stands on a hill looking directly at the camera. He's wearing a dark green suit with matching overcoat. On his head he's wearing a hat made of fur. It's long. The fur drapes down his back. He has a long white beard, and it's down to his chest. In his left hand he's holding the horns of a bull. In his right hand he holds a thick piece of rope. It's short. It's the kind of rope you might see on a ship. One end of the rope is on fire, but the Doctor doesn't look worried. He looks to the camera with a defiant stare. A stare that says, I'm just standing here with my bull horns, my rope on fire, and my green suit. What's your problem? And this was his attitude. A man who would live one of the most extraordinary lives stares to the camera, and he's not asking you to look at him as a spectacle. And if you are, he doesn't care. He's not asking for your approval. He doesn't need it. He's not asking for your opinion. He couldn't care less. He's asking, what's your problem? Why are you staring? This man, this guy, what a life he led. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay. A new story for you, and I've got to say a big thank you to Alice Tracy. A whoop whoop. Thanks, Alice, for getting in touch with this story. I did not know who this person was. I will be honest. No idea. This had never come across my path, and I am so glad that it did. So thank you, Alice. Alright, I just want to say a quick hello to all the new members of the Facebook group and Twitter followers and Instagram followers. I appreciate you. Thanks for getting in touch. I really love hearing from you. I do. No, if you've emailed me, I do apologise. I got locked out of my emails because I forgot my password. What a fan, Dan. But hey, that's life. That's happens. Yeah, so let's get on. Okay, this guy, mad as a box of frogs. And what a story. Alright, my sexy cherubs. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Okay, we are way back in time. The year 1800. Remember it? Yeah, it was good times. So we're in Wales, one of the most beautiful of the British Isles. Is it more beautiful than Scotland? Well, hey, that's up for debate. But not really, because Scotland smacks Wales across the arse in terms of beauty. But hey, I don't want to, start a fight. Because Scotland would win. I'm kidding on, my Welsh listeners, I'm kidding on. Okay, so in the town of Caerphilly, the Price family reside. Now, the Price family were prestigious, they were well known, famous almost, because they had a long line of men who held big jobs, well known positions, men of the cloth, men of great business. And so the family, I suppose it was kind of like that family in the neighbourhood that everyone knows. Kind of like the Kardashians. That's a rubbish example, but you know, kind of like a family everybody knows who this family is. So this story focuses on one man in the family, but before we get to him, let's talk a little about the men who went before him. Grandfather of the family, Charles Price, he worked in ironmongering and he ran a really successful business. And from it his family profited. There was quite a bit of wealth, quite a bit of money. He would go on to have a son called William, and William was brilliant. And I mean brilliant here in the sense of his mind. He had a brilliant mind. He was super intelligent. He excelled at school, and at 18 he went off to Oxford to study theology and become a clergyman. His calling was in God, and he wanted to return to his Welsh town and work in the local church. He really dreamed of this, and his family were so proud that their brilliant son was going to go off, study, and come back and be the local priest. Sadly, this would never happen. William Price began to show signs of mental health problems around about the age 22. So he'd returned from studying and he was suffering from delusions. He was seeing things, he was talking to people who weren't there, and his family were like, oh my goodness, what do we do? So in the 1800s, in the year 1800, what did they do for mental health? Well, the first part of the plan, Grandfather Charles came up with this, and it was seemingly quite simple. He must get married immediately. This will cure him. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think marriage helps cure a mental health issue. And I'm using the word cure here very deliberately. I know these days we talk about management of mental health problems, but in this year, it was a cure that they talked about. And it was a cure they wanted. I mean, the man would be described as batshit crazy. Really, that's kind of how it was talked about. So marriage was seen as the solution. So horribly, William gets forced into a marriage with a housemaid. I mean, literally, the family found the first girl they could and went, you'll do, come on, over you come, right, here you go, right, you're getting married. And she's like, what? She's 18 years old, she's illiterate, she's from a very poor family, and she's being married to a man who is not well. I mean, he's really not well. Anyway, the marriage happens, and over the next 8 years, this girl would give birth to 7 children, to the now exceptionally unwell William Price. So here she is, she's in her mid to late 20s, 7 children, and what of William? Well, by now he'd reached full peak of speaking to people who weren't there, and he was deemed dangerous to himself and to others, and so he was tied with restraints to a bed in the Price family home. And that treatment continued until he died, and he died at the age of 30. Ooh. Now, before he died, unbelievably, he managed to have something of a relationship with his 7 children. I mean, some of them not really, because they were so young, they were only babies. But he was kind of allowed a bit of access to them. Never alone, and never without another family member there. They would have to, this is horrendous, but they would have to come to his bedroom if they wanted to see their father strapped to the bed. He wasn't allowed up out the bed to talk to them or to touch them or anything. He just had to be restrained to the bed, but he would talk to them and he would tell them stories. He had this habit of trying to teach them Latin. He was obsessed with this idea that kids needed to learn Latin. And when he started all this business, the family would take the kids away and be like, he's off on one. Something's gone wrong in his brain. We need to get the kids out. But he had this real fear. So one of the children, one of these 7 children, is the star of the story that I'm going to tell. And he's another William. He's only 6 years old when he sees his dad at his absolute worst, chained to the bed. Now the rest of the family, they see something in the 6-year-old William which both pleases them and terrifies them. He, like his father, is brilliant. So smart. Now he goes to the local school, and by the age of 11, he's been given a teaching position. Lol. Can you actually imagine, like, you turn up at school and your teacher is an 11-year-old? Hello, hi there. You'd be like, great. But that's really how great his mind was. So, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of prayers that William won't grow up to be like his dad, that he hasn't caught the madness gene, or whatever they believed at the time was the madness gene. They really hoped he hadn't caught it. Now what doesn't help here, right, is that William would do things that kind of raised alarm, especially in the town that they lived in. Remember I said they're quite a well-known family, so there's a lot of scrutiny, there's a lot of people watching them. As a teenager, William would walk around the town completely naked. Just take all his clothes off and go for a walk. Bold. Brave. I mean, teenagers, it's usually like fear and shame about their bodies, but not for William. He's like walking about going, look at my twig and my berries. He doesn't care. He's like, yeah, whatever. Now, of course, this is to the absolute horror of his family, and they're convinced he's going the same way as his dad. Now, when William wasn't wandering into the local bakery, butt naked, he was dreaming about his future, and he'd decided on medicine. He had this kind of fascination with illness and with sickness. He looked around him and he saw ill people, sick people, and he couldn't believe how they were treated. He couldn't believe that more wasn't being done for sick people. So we're going to learn this as we go with William. He can be debated as a real figure who is, a villain or a hero. And I guess that's why he's interesting. But he's definitely, when he's younger, he's definitely in hero mode. He wants to help, he's got this real I need to fight for people who can't fight for themselves attitude. So what he does is he goes to the nearest surgeon that he can find, and he's 13 years old at this point. He goes to the nearest surgeon, a man called Dr. Evans, and he says, can I start to train with you? And of course Dr. Evans is like, well, you're only 13. But then at the same time, 2 years before he'd been employed as a school teacher, so, Dr. Evans knows he's got the brains. So he's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. So for 5 years, William studies closely with Dr. Evans, the surgeon. And that's until the time comes for him to leave and go to London. He gets a place at the London Hospital where he goes to study to be a surgeon. And amazingly, a qualification which takes some people 5 years to get, William does it in 3. By the time he's 21, he's an accomplished surgeon. And it's believed he's this incredible healer of the sick. Now back home, his family are nervous. Because they're thinking, well, yeah, he shows a lot of promise, but so did his dad. And look what happened there. Things went really wrong once he'd gone to study and came back. And it's not so much that when William returns from studying that he's showing mental health concerns. It's more that he's quite bold in his opinions. And some people will call him a bit off the wall. They'll say he's a bit eccentric, he's a bit odd. He's definitely got strong opinions. And during the time that he'd been in London studying, he'd really seen poverty up close. He'd seen people living in awful conditions. And this is what he decides he's going to do about it. He sets himself up as a doctor. People come to see him. And he charges the rich people who come to see him twice the amount that a normal doctor would charge. And this is because he's good, because he's brilliant. So people are willing to pay double to, be treated by this young maverick doctor. And when the poor came to see him, he would charge them nothing. He would take all that extra money that he'd made from the rich clients and he would buy medicines for people who couldn't afford it. So that's great. That's amazing. And we could get lost in a very long dialogue. We won't, but we could, about healthcare, about free healthcare. But Dr. Price was really on this issue. Now back to the things that people considered to be odd. When he wasn't in his surgery doctoring, he would go around the town of Wales, and then sometimes he would travel to London and do this. He would take with him like a little stool, right, like a little three-legged stool, and he'd set himself up in the middle of a town, and he'd start to just preach loudly about his beliefs. And some of them were health related, so he talked a lot about vegetarianism. He was big on this issue. We shouldn't eat any meat. It is going to kill us. Very anti-smoking. Very anti-smoking. He wouldn't actually treat anyone who came to see him if they smoked. Rich, poor, young, old, didn't matter. If you came to him and you were a smoker, he was like, nope, it's your choice. You've chosen to die. I'm not going to help you. Sometimes, when he was giving these little speeches in the centres of town, he would wander off talking about medicine and start discussing feminism. He felt that women weren't treated fairly because, men were favoured in society, and he wanted to see change. Because of this, he had lots of female fans, basically. The women loved him. His surgery was filled daily with lots of different females. He also promoted free love and nudism. Not necessarily together. Not those two things together. Well, maybe those two things together, I don't know. But he was definitely into big free love and nudism. He was just like, stay away from marriage, get your kit off, wander about, it's fine, right? So, and he wanted people to know about these beliefs. Like I said in the beginning about him, he didn't care if he didn't agree, but he just wanted people to know these were his opinions. Socks. He had mega issues with socks, right? He was like, socks will kill you. They will give you the cold. This is what he believed. They will give you the cold and you will die. You have to stop wearing socks. Let your feet breathe. And amongst all of this, I know it sounds like a lot of issues, and it is. He sort of went big issue to small issue in the same speech. But William really wanted to fight for factory workers. He felt that they weren't treated correctly, they weren't paid correctly, and he forms groups. Essentially we're talking about early unions, early sort of co-ops. He's creating these groups and helping them to fight for their rights. He had serious issues at the time with the fact that poor males weren't allowed to vote. That was another one of his causes. And kind of what I'm hoping you're getting here is a picture of a real noisemaker. He was a man who wanted to be heard. And like I said, here's the thing, if you didn't like his opinion, he didn't give a flying fudge. He just couldn't care less. He was like, I'm going to go down to the town centre and I'm going to shout my opinions, and if you don't like it, move along. Move on. Now it's around this time as well he takes to really mixing up his look fashion wise. Now he's a prestigious, well known doctor, but he decides to flaunt the traditional sharp suits that doctors would wear. He starts wearing like loose fitting trousers, long, brightly coloured shirts. He grows his hair long, it goes all the way down his back. He grows his beard long. Men of this time generally didn't look like this, especially doctors didn't look like this, but Dr. William Price did. He also took to wearing dead animals around his neck. So like fox taxidermy would often be wrapped around his neck. I mean, sounds fabulous to me. So, what else is Big Willie up to at this time? Well, he's no stranger to high society and the well-to-do of both Wales and bits of London. After all, he is a top surgeon, and he's about to be made chief surgeon at a very good Welsh hospital. He's still in his 20s at this point. You know, that's a young time in his life to get such a prestigious position. But it's like I say, it's because he's really, really good. So he finds himself in amongst all these very successful doctors, lawyers, people who had money. Money, I will just say, is not something that Dr. Price was particularly good at. He was constantly in debt. And the reason is he would give away a lot of his money to poor people who needed it. And then, or whichever cause, you know, he was constantly fighting, he would give all his wages away and then be like, oh shit, I'm skint. I've got no money. Anyway, he was still being invited to all these posh parties, and he would find himself in the company of attractive females. There he is, dressed in his gold trousers, dead fox round his neck, and he was attractive to women. And he made as much of this as he could. He liked to play. He enjoyed a series of romances, some short-lived, some longer, but he was a player. Big Willie Price was out to play. He was a fancy boy, if you will. Big Willie Fancy Boy. That should have been his nickname. That would have been brilliant. What a great nickname that would be, wouldn't it? Imagine if I met someone and they were like, oh, hi, is it Barry or Baz? I'd be like, actually, it's Big Willie Fancy Boy. You can just call me that. So it's worth remembering, right? All of this, his behaviour, it's being watched and it's being judged by his family, his friends, locals in Wales, and those who knew him in London. Because in the background is lurking his father's history. By now the word lunatic is used freely, and people are aware he had a lunatic father. It's what Dr. Price does next that convinces people he might not be as stable as they would like. He begins to get into Druidism. Now, a quick history lesson here. The Druids are a religious sect that sit outside of other religious groups and really were, in their time, centuries before, a very powerful group of people, especially in earlier times, way before Dr. Price. Druids were believed to be closer to God than any other human on earth. They had a direct line to God. They could speak to God in ways that others couldn't. And this brought them power. This brought them control and powerful positions. So, like for example, if someone committed a sin, someone committed a crime, a druid could slaughter that person freely. This sinner could be slaughtered because the druid had the word of God, and this was okay. And druids would be things like doctors and lawyers, and their word was final. They could be called in to settle public arguments. They were called upon in times of war and in battles because they had this connection with God. So at age 35, Dr. Price joins a group of druids who are fighting for the rise of Druidism to come back. He wants to see the rise of it again, and he wants to be at the forefront of it. So he joins something called the Society of the Rocking Stone. Catchy name. And this is in Pontypridd in Wales. And he begins to preach his Druid beliefs to anyone who will listen. Anyone at all. So his sort of joining of this group and these beliefs, it raises a few eyebrows in the medical community and amongst his patients. They wonder if he's losing it. But he carries onwards. Now, even in extreme groups, you will have someone who's really extreme. You know, I'm thinking of there's lots of extremist groups in the world. You'll always have someone in there who just takes it that bit too far. And William Price was the man to just take it a bit too far. He would really go out of his way to try and prove to the other Druids that God was speaking to him directly, and they were all just like, William, it's too much. Like, we all share the same belief, but you're too extreme in it. You're trying to, spread this word to everyone and anyone who will listen, and it's annoying people now. It's making people think you're crazy. You've got to calm down. But he wouldn't. He was committed to it. By this point, he'd absolutely decided to just screw any of society's norms. He was fully invested in wearing a long cape. He would walk around the town with a wooden staff that had some bull horns on the end. He wore a fox fur hat and the longest beard you've ever seen in your life. He just let his hair and his beard grow long. Jonathan Van Ness would lose his shit if this was an episode of Queer Eye. He'd be like, honey, we have got to do something about that hair. So just to give you an idea about his medical practice, well, like I said, all of this Druid and his look and his preaching aside, people trusted him because he knew surgery. He knew medicine. And so, this is an example. One day, when a young girl in the town goes into labour in her house and she's in excruciating pain, there's only one doctor that the family want there. Dr. Price. So he is called to the girl, who by this point is on the kitchen floor, bleeding and screaming in pain. And he tells her father she needs a caesarean. The caesareans, as we know, is an incision made through a woman's abdomen to remove the baby. And at this time, caesareans were the worst thing a pregnant mother could experience, because the sad fact is this: someone would die. Either the baby or the mother would die in the process. But Dr. Price told the family to trust him. They didn't. They didn't trust him at all. Now, they knew he was a good doctor, but is he a miracle worker? So, standing in the kitchen, the family are looking at their teenage daughter, thinking one of two things is going to happen here. We're either going to lose our daughter, or we're going to lose our grandchild. But he carries on. He performs the surgery, and amazingly, both mother and baby survive, and they go on to live healthy lives. Now, he might be unorthodox, but there is no denying he gets the job done. So again, you've got sort of two things battling each other here. One is the medical community respecting the fact that he is a bit unorthodox and he will do his own things, but also hating him for the fact that he will tell anyone who listens that doctors are nothing but, as he calls them, poison peddlers. He says that doctors are only doctors because they can make money from it. They can charge a lot of money and skim some off the top. He tells anyone who will listen that medicines are overpriced, medicines should be free for the poor. The doctors are inherently an evil bunch of people. So you can imagine this riles a lot of people up. A lot of people are very unhappy that this is what he's going about saying, and yet at the same time he's performing surgeries that people are like, oh wow, I didn't really know that could be done. So yeah, extremes. So at around about 40 years old, his notoriety as eccentric and outspoken, this just keeps leading him into any fight that's ever being fought. He's there regardless of what it is. If there is a group of people being unfairly treated, he is right in the middle of it. And he joins a group of Welsh men and Welsh women who are concerned that the Welsh language is dying out. They're worried that English is now taking over, and they want to preserve the Welsh language. So, like his father had been obsessed with Latin disappearing and tried to teach it, Dr. Price sets up free Welsh lessons wherever and whenever he could. He taught kids the Welsh language. He argued loudly that the Welsh history books were being eradicated, and he felt that English and Scottish culture was beginning to take over, and he did not like it one little bit. So he pulled together some supporters. Between 100 and 200 people at first, and they would meet up, and he would lead these meetings, and he would get them really whipped up into a frenzy, believing that the government was trying to, diminish Welsh people, and he just would not stand for it. He went on a fundraising campaign to get money to build a Welsh museum and fight the government, who were, in his opinion, just trying to wipe out Welsh heritage. Now, by this point, he had bought a farm in Caerphilly in Wales, and he'd hold these meetings at his farm. Within a year, he has over 1,000 people in his group. He is building an army. And he tells his army that the government are soon going to try and stop them being so vocal, that the government don't like troublemakers. But he was going to make trouble anyway. So he started teaching his army of people how to use guns. On his farm, he would hold weekly gun training sessions, because he tells the group the government will use force to try and quiet us down, and we must be ready to shoot. Okay. So when he hears that money he has asked for from the government to build his Welsh museum is instead going to be given to Queen Victoria so that she can build some new stables for her horses, he loses his shit. He is not happy. He rallies his group together and he tells them, we're going to march to Parliament with guns and demand the money is given to us. Now, the government and the police, they've heard tales of the eccentric doctor and his army, and they're watching him. They decide to take this tactic. They let it be known publicly that Dr. William Price is dangerous, and that the Welsh people should avoid joining his army, for it will only lead to trouble. But he continues his fight for what he thinks is right. And really what comes with it is exactly what the police want and the government want. People who saw him as a little bit kooky, a little bit eccentric, oh, there goes that crazy man in his gold suit. They start to think, is he dangerous? Is he actually a problem? People start avoiding him. They become concerned by his behaviour. Not his disciples, of course. They believe everything he's got to say. Now, the police find out about the plot to march to Parliament with guns, and they put out a search warrant for him. And what this leads to is almost 500 people turning up at his farm, demanding that he hand himself over to the police for trying to incite a riot. Now, some of his more loyal followers, they had warned him that this was coming. They told him days in advance, there's going to be people turning up here who want to see you imprisoned. You need to get out of here. And so he does. He makes an escape, and his next move is a bold one. Are you ready? He escapes Wales. He goes to France, but he does it in disguise. Wait for it. He goes to France as a woman. Fearing he'll be caught by police, he gets hold of a wig, a dress, a lady's bag, some makeup, and off he goes. Ooh la la. He spends 6 months hiding out in France dressed as a woman. Sure, William. Sure thing. I'd do the same, to be honest. I think it's a great plan. I love it. Now remember, this isn't the days of Drag Race, right? There's no RuPaul here saying, Shantae, you stay. This is a man in a dress with some makeup on. But he's quite happy. Yeah, he thinks, great, I've outrun the police. Now, it's while in France he will have a life-altering moment, and this is going to set in motion the next few years of his life. He's visiting the Louvre. I never know how you say it. Even though I've been, I still don't know how to say it. So he's at the Louvre, and he sees a stone, a huge, big, massive stone, and it's got Greek writing on it. And he sort of wanders over to it. He's looking at this stone. He's examining it. Now, he can't read Greek, right? But this day, he's convinced he can. He thinks he knows how to read Greek on this day. And he's convinced that the message on this stone is him being sent a message by God. Remember, he's still a druid, so he still believes that he's getting direct messages. And he thinks that the message is an important one. One that is going to become his life's work. So he quickly returns to Wales. Now it's been 6 months. The government, the police, the crowd, they're no longer looking for him. He goes back to his farm. He gathers his disciples and he tells them of what he's seen. He says that this stone in France has told him that he is to be the father of a son, and that he must do this urgently because his son was to be the next Messiah. The male child born of his loins was to be the second coming of Christ. And so he sets about getting busy, getting jiggy with it. By now he's in his early 50s, and he calls in his personal tailor, who whips him up some fruity suits with handmade buttons. He gets buttons that have got engravings of his favourite goats from his farm on them. And so, looking dapper, he heads out and he tells everyone exactly what he's looking for. He's looking for a female to impregnate because he needs a son. This son is the second Messiah. But bad luck will befall him here. He gets 3 different Welsh women pregnant, and they all give birth to girls. He's disappointed. He needs that son. And over time, he starts to wonder, maybe he's misread the stone at the Louvre. Maybe he's misread it. Maybe he wasn't really meant to have a son. And he questions this for a long time. But then he decides, no, that was a message directly to me. I have to carry on trying. So he's still working as a doctor at this time. One of his patients happens to mention that he has a niece who's looking to settle down and might make a good partner for William. And so the two meet. Dr. Price, he decides this girl, Gwen, should be his wife immediately, and that she should start bearing children. I'm going to point out something very important here. Quite a bit of time has passed when he's been trying to have this son of his that's not yet happened. He's 81 years old by this point. And Gwen, his new wife, she's 21. 60-year age gap. Within a month, they're married. And he is not messing about. Gwen is pregnant very quickly. And she gives birth to a boy. Dr. Price is beside himself with joy. Finally, he has the son that he was supposed to have. What does he call this child? Jesus Christ. That's actually what him and Gwen call this baby. Jesus Christ Price. Okay, fine. Now, Dr. Price, he is showing this baby off at every opportunity. He's so happy, so proud. And then tragedy strikes. The baby is 5 months old, and Dr. William is at home with Gwen. And he's holding the 5-month-old in his arms when the baby starts to have a convulsion. Even in the arms of this brilliant doctor, the baby can't be saved, and he dies in his father's arms. This leaves William and Gwen devastated. Absolutely heartbroken. Now, because of his beliefs in Druidism and many other things, they don't arrange a funeral for the baby. Dr. Price has his own plan. 2 days after the baby's death, on a Sunday, Gwen and Dr. Price walk to an area right in the middle of the town where they live. Now, the town has a big stretch of grass, a big grassy area, and it leads up to quite a steep hilltop. It's 6 p.m. on this Sunday, the sun's going down, and the local churches are starting to come out after Sunday service, so the place is flooded with people. And some of the locals notice that there are flames coming from the top of the hill, and they begin to raise the alarm. Police arrive, and pretty soon there's a crowd of 300 people gathered at the bottom of the hill, wondering what is going on at the top of this hill. They can see 2 figures and something on fire. So they begin to advance up the hill. Police lead the way, and when they get to the top, it's Dr. Price and Gwen. Dr. Price is dressed in a long, white, flowing robe. He's got his staff with the bull horns, and between them is a fire. The policeman asks what is burning, and Dr. Price won't say. Neither will Gwen. In frustration, the policeman kicks whatever is on fire, and the corpse of their 5-month-old baby rolls down the hill. The crowd go wild. They try to lynch Dr. Price and Gwen. cremation is not legal, and cremating a baby in the centre of town is enough to create a riot. He has to be helped into hiding by police. I mean, bearing in mind he's 81, he can't outrun an angry mob, and the corpse is taken away. Now, the following day, he is arrested. You see, this is what has happened. Word has spread, falsely, but nonetheless, word has spread that Dr. Price has murdered his son. Why? I don't know. Why people thought that, I have no idea, but they did. People believed this. This was just one of these. People started talking, gossip started, and it got out of control. The townsfolk really believed that he was crazy enough, that this is the kind of thing he would do. Like I say, not true, but they believed it. So he sits in jail for 2 months as his trial is prepared. And his trial begins, and it's big. It was the trial of the bloody century, for God's sake. The case of the crazy doctor and the illegal cremation of his child. Now, of course, everything gets dragged in to this trial. His druid beliefs, everything he's ever said that people think is crazy, it all comes out in court. Now, do you think, given what we know about William Price, do you think he sat in court like a shy wallflower? Did he bollocks? He was his own lawyer. He was up on his feet, arguing his case every day. And he had one thing going for him in this trial. And that was this. Cremation wasn't actually illegal. People believed it was. People really thought it was illegal, but it wasn't. And so he would bring into court every day text after text, book after book into the courtroom, and he would say, show me where it's illegal. This is just something we believe. You're not going to find this in the books. Yeah, it's looked upon as a bad thing to do, but technically I've not broken the law. And they couldn't argue with him. The judge in the case couldn't actually argue with him. And he's found not guilty. Another doctor is able to prove that the baby had died from a convulsion and not from being set on fire, as the townspeople seem to believe. So what does he do next? By this point he's 82. Well, he tells Gwen they're going to have to get pregnant again soon. Because he still wants that boy. He still wants another male child. So 2 more children will follow in the next couple of years. Gwen gives birth to a son. Once more, they call this one Jesus Christ Price. And they have a girl called Penelope. And they all live quite happily on the Price farm. His fight with this idea of cremation is not done. He will write to the authorities and he will fight for the right for families to have the choice between a burial and cremation. Now, what he set in motion with the cremation of his 5-month-old son was the beginning of change. Ideas and laws around cremation began to shift. Given the fear that bodies buried in a graveyard could carry disease and maybe make people ill, the idea of cremation went from seeming like this absolute sacrilege to actually maybe being an option. People shifted their thoughts. They started to question it. It was being hotly debated. And of course, he was there. He was there for that argument. He was down for that chat. He wanted that. At 86 years old, Dr. Price was at home with Gwen and their 2 very young children when he started to feel unwell. He gathered his children and Gwen in the family kitchen, and he told them this: "I am not long for this world, and you must carry on fighting for me." His son was 4 and his daughter was 3, and Gwen was in her mid-20s. Over the next few days, Gwen asked him to, see a doctor. Go and see if someone can help you if you're not feeling well, and he refused. Remember, he was the best, He knew it was too late to do anything. But over the days that he worked in secret with Gwen on a plan. Together they wrote letters and instructions, and he told her exactly what he wanted to happen when he died. These important pieces of paper that they worked on were stored in a locked box in the house, and only Gwen had the key. Only days after he first told them of feeling unwell, he lay down on the couch to rest, and he told this to his family: "I will lay down on my couch and I will not rise again." They huddled together for one last kiss, one last cuddle, and as he lay down, Gwen asked him if he wanted a glass of cider, and he said, "No, bring me some champagne." And those were the last words he ever spoke. The day after his death, Gwen got to work. She had visits with bishops, lawyers, politicians, and town planners, because Dr. William Price was going to have a funeral, and it was going to be on his terms. That same hill, that same setup. He was going to be cremated. His cremation was announced in the papers, and from across Wales, 20,000 people travelled for the funeral. In a life where he had fought for so many people's rights, for his beliefs, and saved so many sick people, and helped these workers who couldn't help themselves, he gathered quite the crowd. The cremation was at 10 a.m, and by 4 a.m, the crowds were so large it was actually difficult for them to get his body to the top of the hill. And then it happened just the way that he wanted. With Gwen and his children there, Dr. Price was cremated on top of that hill. The crowd dispersed, and some of his belongings were left up there to mark his passing. Say what you like about him. He lived his life. Whether you agree or disagree, there is no denying he's a man to be reckoned with and remembered. There would, years later, be a statue built of Dr. Price, and it was placed in Caerphilly. Penelope, his daughter, she went on to fight his cause for the Welsh language and set up Welsh language schools. Gwen raised the children alone, and Jesus Christ changed his name to James as he got older. Some of his belongings were taken and put into Welsh museums. I think the biggest legacy is cremations. These days it's an option. It's everywhere. We have that choice. But only by doing it so publicly and so controversially was that conversation able to start. And so ends the story of Dr. William Price. Okay. Wowzers. What a tale, what a man. Yeah, I was just immediately caught by that. I just think, what a life. Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay. Right, I'm out of here. So, remember, I have got Patreon. If you would like to support the podcast, you can get extra episodes. All the usual social medias. You can get me there. Alright. Yeah, cool. So until we speak again, okay, Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.